just say that I do represent young people, so you are covered.
Mhlaba ugugi.
Let me start by congratulating Usongezo on his second book, and I am looking forward to reading your incisive work here. I have three very, very basic questions, and my first question is a philosophical one. And I would want to get your views on it. Can a society produce a leader or leaders better than itself? That's my first question to you. And the second question that I would like to ask you, Songezo, if you were to look at the South African challenges that we have now, would you characterize them as a leadership crisis or a crisis of accountability? That's my second question. And the last one, I haven't read the book, I must confess. I've just bought it now. But my cursory look at the book now, I see that on page 173, you talk about the targets that have been set in the National Development Plan. And amongst those targets is a GDP of, I think it was 5.4%, yeah?
5.4% per
yeah,
annum.
yes. Yeah. And by 2022, if I remember well, the IDP, sorry, not the IDP, sorry, the NDP projected that we would have reduced our unemployment rate to about 16%, if I'm not mistaken. And the Gini coefficient, I think if I remember well, would have been reduced to 0.59 or thereabouts. But the essence of this is that since the adoption of the NDP in 2012, we have hardly met any of those development indicators. We have not even come close to meeting the majority of the development indicators that are articulated in the National Development Plan. And my question to you is, how or what would you attribute this failure, basically? Because I mean, it is, I don't have another word to describe it, quite honestly. How or what would you attribute the failure of us meeting the targets of the National Development Plan, which obviously has been touted as a plan that was meant to really take us out of the quagmire of poverty, inequality, and unemployment? Thanks.
Thank you very much. I'm trying very hard to remember all three, but I think I can deal with them together or in sequence. So the first one is that, I think to your first question, is the societies that advance do not have leaders that are necessarily a representation of that society. But it has brave individuals who are willing to make the ideal a reality. That's a very difficult process of continuous disaffection with what you have, the step to which you now have to say, we need to keep moving forward to improve. 1, 2, 3, 4. Visionary leadership without the action itself is meaningless. And I think in many of these instances, the society advances in leaps and bounds because the person or people who are the collective that is in leadership essentially wants to be better than what the society is. So you're constantly looking to be better than what you already are. And therefore you keep trying and moving forward. So that's the thing. And I think if we were to always try and produce the best representation of who we are, we probably are going to fall short. Ask the United States of America and the problems they have now. So that is the first thing. The second question is, do we have a crisis of leadership or accountability? We have both, unfortunately, right? In the sense that the manner in which we understand leadership is skewed, and I spoke about that earlier on, which is we don't think of it as servant leadership. We think of it in terms of power and what the possibilities that it gives to us. So the people who in isiXhosa are abathunywa, that is the MPs and so on, and the people we elect, we call them my leader. Philosophically, that's your first problem right there. Because when we're also saying they should not be accountable, right? So I would say we've had both because we have elevated people who believe the elevation makes them unaccountable. And that's what we need to change. So that's the second thing. So why have we not reached the targets? So there is a concept that I think we underestimate, and that is a concept of institutions. Institutions are the capability and the infrastructure you build in order to do what you need to do. Because an individual or a loose collection of individuals cannot do them. So you need to build an institution to make possible what you want. So that's the first thing that we need. The second thing is a change in the thinking around the purpose for which you are forming those institutions, right? And we've got both of them wrong in the case of the NDP. So what happens simultaneously while the NDP is being touted and so on? You have destruction of institutions. You have a complete destruction of institutions. I can tell you, where you destroying institutions, you're not going to be able to achieve anything because you're destroying the capacity. That's why the lights are going off. That's why the cops can't catch criminals. You're banning Clemeza there and those other people. That's why the prosecutors can't prosecute cases because the good prosecutors eventually went. And so we destroyed the institutions. And we put Malusi Gigaba there and Des van Rooyen, a treasure. No, these things have consequences. So that's what we've done. We've engaged in institutional destruction, but we've done something else. And that is to fantasize about the future we want rather than working with the present we have in order to get where we need to go. So let's use the unemployment. If you look at each of Ibrahim Patel's plans for a better economy and so on, they miss a very big thing that we spoke about earlier, which is the nature of the unemployment in South Africa. So what kind of economy are you building? And where is that GDP growth located? Because the reality is, if you maintain the same structure of the economy that we have, with the geographical asymmetries that you have in terms of where that GDP is located, you are always going to have large parts of the Eastern Cape as the poor parts of the country. Because you're thinking about a big industrial society where people go into a factory at 8 o'clock and they come out at 5 o'clock and they are members of a union and that sort of thing. That's the ANC's way of thinking about development and economy. So the framing, therefore, of what you do in order to advance development and build an economy was misplaced, along with the destruction of institutions. But let me contrast this very quickly, because a favorite thing of leftists is to criticize gear and so on and so forth. So I I wrote last year the history of the 100 years of the South African Reserve Bank. And then I came back to this book. And I had access to a lot of historical record. And it was fascinating to see the unsaid part of the rebuilding of this economy, which was the building of institutions. I'll make just one example and shut up. So in the early 1990s, before 94, and through 1994, 95, you have millions, tens of millions of man days, of work days lost due to strike action. And the crucial intervention is the Labor Relations Act, the Basic Conditions of Employment Act, and so on, and the CCMA and so on. The principle there is this: you must have a proper and credible dispute resolution mechanism in order to lower the number of wildcat strikes that you have that disrupt the economy. That's institutional thinking. So let me ask, what's the new labor philosophy now that we have? There is none. There's none. And so let me get back to what Lukhona said. The reason I am asking people, the people here with master's degrees and PhDs, is that, guys, voting doesn't solve that problem. That's an intellectual problem that we have. So, but you can't make an influence on the outcomes if you don't take political power to do it. You can't. Why must I take your suggestion? Who are you? So that's the boldness we must have in order to reflect this thinking in how we form the institutions and make them work. The CCMA was not there before, or the Labor Relations Act as we know it, but you had to build that architecture. And one of the things that happened immediately, productivity went up, because simply people are working. It's not even that the economy is inherently growing, but people are spending more time at work because disputes get resolved properly. And so the work we've got to do is a lot. Sorry, I also talk a lot.
It happens when you are asked a philosophical question.